I have to say, I'm really happy and really surprised and glad to see so many people joining us. It is November 9th. It's a Tuesday, the beginning of November. I'm sure none of you are busy at all with end of year plans, all sorts of fun shenanigans leading up to Giving Tuesday in a few weeks. So really appreciate all of your time here. I hope that we have a pretty good session in store for you all, a good conversation. We're going to be talking about trends throughout this session. It's all sorts of things that I think could be helpful for you guys going through into this end of year season. We'll be talking about messaging, some updates on those Apple iOS issues that we may or may not be seeing right now. We're going to be talking about some sustainers and all sorts of fun things. I am more than happy to be talking as much as possible in here, but I think everyone on my team would like me to not talk the entire time. So if you guys have any questions at all and want to just sort of interject or type in the chat, ask anything, I think that'll be much more fun for everyone involved. It is now 12:06. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll kick this off with a bit of introductions. I've been sort of chatting for a couple minutes already. My name is Orwin Evenson. I'm a vice president here at MissionWired. I help oversee our nonprofit practice, and I have the great privilege of working with so many smart people here at MissionWired. And directly, I get to work with my good friend and colleague over here at Americares, the senior director of direct response. Trista, would you like to introduce yourself here?
Of course. Hi, everybody. I'm Trista Murphy. I'm the Senior Director of Direct Response Fundraising and Marketing here at Americares. Americares is an international relief organization working in over 90 countries around the world. We are a lot like a lot of other international relief organizations in that we respond to disasters and people affected by poverty around the world. And I'm just really happy to be here today to talk to all of you about some exciting trends in fundraising as we head into Giving Tuesday and year end. And I'm going to pass over to Sarah.
Hello, everyone. So excited to see so many names in the chat. Excited to talk with you more later. I'm Sarah Gugesberg. I'm a senior vice president here at MissionWired and serve as our creative director. So that means I work closely with the team we have here on the MissionWired side, and also folks like Trista, our client partners, to make sure that we are bringing creative visions and stories and missions to life. And like Orwin mentioned, we're going to be talking through particularly a section I'm excited about, which is some trends we've been seeing in creative on SMS, on email, on ads, you name it. And really excited to have that discussion with you all. With that, I'll kick it over to my colleague, Andrea.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Ramos. I'm an associate vice president here at MissionWired, based in the DC area. So you'll catch me on East Coast time and no earlier than that. I work day in and day out with our clients on their digital programs, including on some of our new exciting data products, including Advantage AI and Curate. So in particular, I'm biased. I'm really excited to talk about the Apple updates, which we will get to soon. So I'm going to kick it back to Orwin.
Yeah. We have a really full agenda here. As I said, please feel free to interrupt. We got a great panel here. We're going to be chatting through a whole bunch of stuff, but we always like to kick things off by keeping you all on your toes. So we're going to have a little warm-up exercise that I think Sarah is going to help us through.
I sure am. So everyone, open your chats, your Zoom chats, get ready. We're going to do, if you've joined one of our webinars before, we do a little quiz. We've got 1, 2, 3 questions to have you all guess at the correct answer here, which I'll read out the question in just a moment. But the motivation, the prize, the reason to do this is that we will go in the chat and find the first correct answer. So not only is the right answer important, but speed too, and we will make a donation to your organization. So with that said, fingers at the ready. By what percentage did nonprofit text message audience size grow in 2020? Is it A, 15%, B, 26%, C, 30%, or D, 50%? What do you all think? We'll give it a minute, let people get their responses in. Got a few in now. By what percentage did nonprofit text message audience size grow in 2020? Anyone else want to take a shot at answering in the chat? Our first A, very good. B seems to be the most common so far. We don't have anyone guessing D. No one thinks it grew by 50%. All right, last final seconds, get your answers in. And Andrea, let's reveal the answer.
All right, drum roll, please. B. So we were monitoring the chat, so congratulations to Ben. You are our first winner. In 2020, mobile text audience growth grew at 26%, wildly outpacing email growth, which was at 3%. So again, later on, when we're talking about acquisition diversification, exploring new channels, SMS is definitely the ones that we are thrilled our nonprofit partners are exploring more.
Excellent. Congrats, Ben. Next up, fingers at the ready. How much was raised on Giving Tuesday last year in 2020? A, $1 billion, B, 1.5 billion, C, 2.5 billion, or D, 3 billion. I don't remember the answer to this. I'm going to cheat and look ahead on our deck. Okay, getting some answers flowing in. Is it 1 billion, 1.5 billion, 2.5 billion, or 3 billion? Give it a few more seconds to get some final answers in here. Okay, last call. How much was raised Giving Tuesday last year? Andrea?
The answer is C, $2.5 billion from more than 35 million donors. Fun fact, that's more donors than the entire population of Texas. You love to see it. It's a short answer. So congratulations to all of you who guessed C. We were monitoring once again. And I believe Melissa had it first. We will save the chat to make sure that we have that right, though.
Melissa! Congratulations. Okay, last one, last chance to win. This is a funny one. The Instagram post with the most likes, the current most likes, is a photo of what? A golden retriever puppy. B, Billie Eilish revealing her blonde hair. C, NASA's photo of a black hole. Or D, an egg. Get those guesses in. The Instagram post with the most likes. Fun fact, I remember I have one of those like core memories baked into my head of getting into a fight with a boy in second grade who said that it was pronounced NASA. And I said, no, it's NASA. And we had a big fight. I'll always remember that. Let's hope he's watching today. Yes, Melissa, that's some classic second grade mansplaining. Final call, Instagram post with the most likes.
This is a fun one. 10 more seconds. Okay, time for the big reveal. An egg with 55 million likes is Instagram's most liked post of all time. Similar to Sarah, I will fully admit that I did not know this. So this is perhaps the most fun fact from our warm-up quiz. And congratulations to Emma. I believe you are our winner for question number 3. So kudos to you all for being so fast and making us truly monitor the chat this morning/afternoon.
Yay, great work, everyone. 3 separate winners. Love to see it. Thanks for warming up with us. Get the chat going, keep using it. We're here to chat.
Yeah, hopefully this gets people chatting away in that chat feature. Zoom has it for a reason, so feel free to ask us anything as we go along. This first section that we're going to dig into are just a lot of the trends that we're currently seeing in creative. So we've sort of browsed our inboxes. We've looked over all sorts of different creative that we've seen around the industry. And we pulled out a few things that we think are pretty interesting for this end of year giving season. Trista is going to help us out here along with Sarah and some others. But would you guys like to take it away and walk us through some trends in creative?
Absolutely. Let's do it. So the first one that we have really been noticing consistently, it's even been coming up in our weekly calls with Trista, is nonprofits borrowing from e-commerce side styles, inspiration, functions, tactics, that kind of thing. Trista, do you want to kick us off with some overviews of the things you've been seeing in the industry?
Yeah, of course. I think things like equivalencies and symbolic giving are always some strongholds in the nonprofit industry. I think our donors always like to feel that tangible side of giving. I like to say they like that serotonin feel of shopping, right? You always feel good when you go to the mall and you can buy a sweater and take it home with you. And so I think sometimes too, those equivalencies can give our donors that same feel good of like, oh my gosh, that $25 gift can give a kit in the field. And then at the same time, they get that serotonin boost of feeling like they gave something. They can also get that feel good philanthropic moment too. So those equivalencies here, like the $12 can provide gauze to help our first responders, or giving the gift of someone, right? Like giving the gift of health for Americares. We always talk about how you can give the gift of good health to people all around the world. Tying the gift that you're giving as a donation to the impact that you're making around the world is always super important as well. So that tying that e-commerce feel, and then straight up e-com, right? This tote bag and the mask and the hat example from Partners in Health here. I think this was tied to a sustainer ask. So if you became a Partners in Health sustainer, you got one of these really cool premiums. So premiums are old aid adage in the magazine industry, right? If you sign up for Vanity Fair for 3 years, you get a cool tote bag and you can tell everyone you're a Vanity Fair fan. And so the same goes for nonprofits. We're seeing this more and more: countdown clocks, thermometers, all of that good stuff. So creating that sense of urgency, creating that sense of deadline, making sure that people feel like if I don't act now, the chance is going to pass me by. I think we always see that in e-com. And so we're starting to see that come more and more into play in the nonprofit space too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really interesting to see those trends increase, and the images you're seeing here kind of on the right side of the screen, I think are from a Nifty Images email, where it's really showing how similarly these layouts and design treatments are brought to life, whether it's in the e-commerce space or like USO here in the middle in the nonprofit space. And, definitely it's a clear trend. It makes sense that it's happening even more so right now as we are going into moments of a lot of online shopping and a lot of attention on deals and inboxes and deadlines, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, holiday shopping. Definitely a trend that we're seeing, and think it's really effective to be able to sort of tap into that shared moment that we're going to be going into with basically all digital audiences. That's what they're going to be getting in their inboxes. And this is kind of how we're seeing so many of these brands get in and compete with that super high volume. Anything else on the presenter side anyone wants to share before we jump to the next slide?
I think Trista shared with me a couple of weeks ago an email from Gap that featured Katy Perry, and it was in October. I'm pretty sure it was in October, and it was a Giving Tuesday email that Gap sent out featuring Katy Perry. I forget what organization. I feel bad.
It was Baby to Baby. It was if you downloaded a song on Spotify, for every download or listen, they would donate to Baby for Giving Tuesday in October. I thought that was an interesting take. I don't know, hot take, interesting one. I'd love to hear from someone. If anyone has an in on the e-com side at Gap, I'd love to know how it did. I'd love to know how much money they raised.
I think this is something that we see more and more, which is sort of brands stepping in to the Giving Tuesday space. I know that they were originally like part of the founding thing with Giving Tuesday back in the day, but Giving Tuesday has been like the big nonprofit fundraising day, and that's what we're all here for. But more and more we see brands doing other things, and just like every other holiday and every other consumer moment, it is starting earlier and earlier. And so I think we're really seeing this convergence of both like brands and consumers, with the similar treatment. Like we often talk about, or we showcase in this presentation even, a lot of what other nonprofits are doing, but it's always helpful, I think, to keep in mind what the consumer brands are doing, because we are competing with them for attention with our donors who are also participating in Black Friday and Giving Tuesday and all of these other moments throughout. So they are being trained by e-commerce brands for how to engage with email. And it makes a lot of sense that we might borrow some of those things and ultimately converge.
It's a really great point, Corwin.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to our next trend. This one has been a really interesting one to see sort of build over the last year or 2 years, where organizations are kind of acknowledging the shared moment that we are in due to COVID-19. So really across the industry, not a lot of heavy focus on this, but definitely spread through content here and there. We're seeing direct call outs to the audience, things like, we understand times are tough, right? We are sort of reaching to you and acknowledging that right now things are difficult, and sort of being mindful of this massive and pretty unique shared moment that people are in, where we know that so many of our supporters and donors have been impacted. There's been job loss, there's been loss of loved ones. And so seeing how that has sort of informed and influenced content choices on a broad scale has been really fascinating. And we think, particularly Trista's going to talk to us a little bit more about how that particularly comes to life when it comes to directly acknowledging mental health. But what we've seen to be really interesting about this particularly is it almost functions as a way to do some kind of audience personalization or customization, but at scale, right? You are sort of acknowledging something unique about the donor, but we are in this moment where that experience is shared by virtually everyone. So it's wild to think about the time that we're in, and then also to see how that has been sort of popping up in content itself, really across the industry. Trista, I'll kick to you to share more specifically about what we've been seeing in Americares particularly, and like the history there.
Yeah, so mental health has always kind of been a tough sell. It's always been a really big programmatic priority for Americares. It's always been something we've focused on. I think particularly when you're thinking about mental health for healthcare workers and the mental health toll that healthcare can take on healthcare workers. And I think particularly in light of COVID, there's been a lot of national conversation about the need for mental health care for healthcare workers as they're working long hours and resources are tight and limited, and healthcare workers are overstretched. And Americares has done a lot of work on mental health for healthcare workers and training healthcare workers to provide that additional mental health work for the patients that they're serving, because mental health is also, resources are also limited. So we've been doing a lot of work internally around mental health. It's always been a big priority for us, but our direct response donors have never really responded to it. It's always been a tough sell. The numbers have never been there from an engagement perspective. It's just never really resonated. And so from time to time, we would take the chance. We would let our direct response donors know what was happening. We would certainly keep them updated in our programmatic efforts, but we started to see this shift over the course of the last year. I think particularly as the national rhetoric around mental health was changing, people were starting to recognize this compassion. People were starting to recognize that mental health was shifting in America. And I think really globally, right? Like, we were starting to have these very real conversations with friends, with family. We were starting to see the compassion play out in the things that we were reading about or the emails we were getting. And so very recently, thanks to our great partnership with our team here at MissionWired, we did a mental health survey across our direct response donor base, and it was one of the highest engagement rates we had in recent email campaigns. And it was really great to see. I mean, from a fundraising perspective, it might not have been the greatest performer, but certainly from an engagement perspective, it was really great to see what was resonating with our donors, what they wanted to hear, how we could engage with them on this. And so we know now that they want to hear about this work. They want to engage with this work. They want to know what we're doing and how they can get more involved in what we're doing and then how we're doing that work. And so that was really great for us. I think it was a learning of just when you think you know your donor base, maybe you need to ask them again what they want to hear about and how they want to engage with you, because I think we were all but ready to kind of sign that one off and continue to do the updates we were doing. But now we know that this is a topic that they really want to engage with. And so we'll continue to provide those compassionate updates and continue to educate them and tell them how they can get involved with that work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that moment of kind of call and response, right? This learning moment where we know that things are evolving, we're feeling it in our personal lives. It's also coming forward in content like this across the industry. It pairs well with your question here, Ben, in the chat about how that language is coming forward, and if it's more subtle to the what we saw early side of the pandemic, the we're all in this together kind of messaging. And I agree. I do think it is more nuanced in the way that, like how Trista's talking about it, right? We did see so many of those early messages that kind of checked a box, right? That said, we know these are unprecedented times, or things that talked about, yes, we're all in this together. And I think now we're seeing, even core messaging be shifted a little bit more, or it being more peppered in a little bit more purposefully, rather than maybe the blanket acknowledgement, right? It seems to be a little more, nuanced is really the best word I can kind of think of. Does that pair with your thoughts too, Trista?
Well, I think yes. And I think it's also taking the opportunity to like give your audiences and your donors a moment to like really reflect and like process what has happened, and really have the opportunity, like this question here, like, how important is it to you that everyone gets mental health care? I don't think we really think about that as individuals on a daily basis. Like, is this really important to me? And so I think giving your audiences and your donor base, and just in general, giving people space and time to think about that, like, yes, this is really important. And I think as we think about things like mental health care is healthcare, like making those blanket statements and really making it transparent, and giving it the space that it needs, I think is important too.
Absolutely. Arwen, were you about to jump in with something?
I sort of threw it in the chat. I think a lot of what we're seeing here is at the beginning of 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was a lot about solidarity. And now I think we're seeing more and more orgs talk more specifically about their role in mental health, either for their staff, for their clients, or the people that they're helping, or in their work at large. I just think it's part of a more specific conversation, and it has to do with like the actions that they're taking, not just the we're all in this together type of solidarity, which we still sort of see, but I think there's more programmatic focus as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, isn't that wild? In the comments talking about that's such a focus of ads for podcasts. I've noticed that too. Almost every single one seems to be about that. It's very interesting. Let's move right along to the next trend we're seeing in creative, which is GIFs. Is this right? Choosy developers choose GIF. That's why I pronounce it that way. I don't know if that's real. It's an age-old question, right? At least age-old until going back to the age of GIFs. And I'll just switch it up and say GIFs and GIFs, so no one in the chat gets upset. We'll do it all. This is another thing that we're seeing more and more of, to be able to, I think, really condense a lot of story, a lot of emotional punch in a very small amount of real estate. I would say I'm definitely seeing more of these across the board as part of a story, right? In the same way where maybe you would read through a magazine article and there would be parts sort of highlighted and called out. I see these pieces of movement and pieces of story sort of functioning in a really similar way, where if you were to skim an email, and this is really what you focus on, it does a lot of work, right? It takes a big section of the story, and really consolidates it. And we're seeing that more and more in places like email, and figuring out how it renders, and making sure that that's an experience that can be more and more consistent, I think. Even, we're seeing on some parts of our work, the actual call to action being put in a GIF form. But here again, what you're seeing on the screen is something from a few of our client partners, where they're telling a story of, by the time you read this is what has happened, or a little snippet from a video of a student being interviewed and showing this bullet, and it's incredibly arresting. And definitely, I think, checks off a lot of those boxes that we're thinking about coming up in this conversation about how do we keep people clicking, right? How are we responsive to Apple changes? what can we do to sort of solicit that extra action? Trista, what are your thoughts here on GIFs?
I think it ties back to the e-com, right? It ties back to the e-com trend in number one. And I think too, it helps us kind of break that ice if we have to have a hard conversation. I think to your point, Sarah, it helps us tell that story in a really concise way. It can help us break the ice. I think it can help us fudge technology, because email can be a little bit antiquated and technology can be hard when you're trying to code across so many types of devices and reach so many different people. And so I think it can help you kind of fudge technology and reach more people. And I think, it just helps you capture that click, for better or for worse, right? It can just capture that attention and help you get that all important click, because I think click's going to rule the world one day, apparently.
Stitch that on a pillow. Yep.
Yep.
Let's take a look at the next slide too. This is an interesting way that this GIF is sort of prompting that response, right? It's demonstrating what we are expecting someone to do and taking a little bit of that lift off. It's a really interesting way to sort of prime a click. It's pretty explicit and really interesting. Any other thoughts from the team here or anyone in the chat before we move on to the next trend? Okay. We can always come back if folks have thoughts on some of these other sections, but the next is this tees right up to what we're going to be talking about again in the second half of this is clickable content. The things that we are seeing organizations do even more explicitly to get the click, and also new ways that we are seeing content sort of invite that, right? Interesting, lighthearted quizzes, sort of user flows that really kind of match that. I would call it that BuzzFeed style, right? Like, see which flower you are, what cup of tea are you, and you answer a few questions about yourself, right? It's like very clickable. Organizations doing that more and more, and maybe being a little more flexible on messaging in order to sort of prioritize these clicks. And then, a few more examples here. Something that's really interesting is this bottom one across the bottom that's saying, are you interested in these emails? Do us a favor and click on literally any of the things below, and we'll keep them coming. And we've been talking again about this a lot with Trista and what we might need to do as far as making things really clickable. So Trista, what are you also seeing in this trend?
I'm seeing just more and more emails come through that are just solely image based, right? Like not a single letter in an email, not a single letter in the sense of like literal copy. It's just an image of like, here's an image, just click it. And I think we did this really early on in our response to the Haiti earthquake in August. We did a look back timeline. And so literally it was a pretty long image. I think you had to scroll pretty far. And it was a beautiful email, and it was solely image based. And that was a deep departure from anything Americares had been doing. We'd been struggling with some email deliverability issues over the course of the several years prior. And so we were really focused on driving deliverability. So we were thinking heavy copy, heavy readable words. But we drove an all image email. And I think it was the highest click to highest engaged email we had sent at that point for a long time. And so, really thinking about those image heavy emails to drive that click, I think is important. And that content is engaging. More and more people want to see images. To that point, we've been doing a lot of testing on emails, images versus no images, thermometers versus no thermometers. And we're seeing that these image emails are winning out from an engagement perspective more and more. And so people really want to see that content. They want to engage with that content. And the more you can get your audience to engage with you, the better off you're going to be from a deliverability perspective, and the more people you're going to be able to hit when you can no longer depend on those open rates.
That is so true. It all kind of falls into the bucket of building relationships, right?
Yep.
Even if you are inviting someone to do something like this, like find this perfect spooky recipe, right? You are checking a lot of different sort of areas of need and areas of value add. I think a lot of it does come back to the value add that you're providing your audiences and your different levels of supporters. And yeah, to Orwin's point too, this is a great point, that all graphic email, especially one that really is mindful of and uses it to its advantage, white space, Very much something that we see frequently in the e-commerce space. So it's an interesting, I think, mix of probably those two trends. Any other thoughts here from the team?
Yeah, it's funny because like way back in the day with email, an all graphic, no HTML email used to be considered like a spam trap, right? Like that would get flagged and it would cause a lot of issues because the file size was too big, et cetera. And now I think because of brands, like now that's sort of okay. And I don't know if they have an in with Gmail or with the other email service providers or something, but it seems to not be the like kryptonite for email as we thought it used to be. So there's just a lot more fun to be had on that front than we did even, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Great. That was the last of our trends in creative. We're going to move on now to some other types of trends we're going to be talking about, but a quick invitation for those joining us today to jump into the chat. We'd love to hear, are you taking on some of these trends? Do you find yourselves participating in them already? Is there anything that sort of struck a chord here with you, or anything that might have sparked an interest in trying something out in some upcoming messaging, whether it's for end of year or even after that? We'd love to hear. So I don't know if we'll necessarily pause for it, but we'll be watching the chat as we talk, and would love to have folks share so everyone in attendance can see. So please feel free to use that chat. But we'll pivot right now to some trends in platforms and tactics.
Amazing. Thanks, Sarah. So given that the last trend we talked about was clickable material, definitely want to dive a bit more specifically into what we're seeing with Apple's mail privacy policy update. So as I'm sure we all know, we had our hair on fire moment earlier this summer when Apple announced that they were going to automatically preload all email content using proxy servers, effectively hindering digital marketers' ability to leverage tracking pixels within these messages. So overall, though, it hasn't quite been the hair on fire moment we thought it was going to be if we take a look at the data and how it's been implemented. So in general, what we've seen this year compared to Apple's update last year, iOS 15 has had a much slower adoption rate. So about a month after its release last year, iOS 14 was at an about 50% adoption rate, whereas this year we're about a month in, a little more, just over 25% of all Apple users have adopted the newest iOS update. So this begs the question, how does this affect open rates and our programs?
Right now, we're still not super sure. As Andrea said, like we haven't really seen in anticipation of this, a lot of people expected open rates to like skyrocket because we would have all of these proxy opens or these pixels would be downloaded and they would be sort of quote unquote fake opens. So we were very much expecting that around the time that the Apple updates came out that we would see skyrocketing open rates. We haven't really seen that for pretty much any of our clients across the board, maybe a little bit of slightly higher open rates, but nothing certainly on the order of what people were expecting. And there's a few things that we've sort of seen come out of that, I suppose. It does seem like right now that this caching, where the loading of emails really only happens when your phone is plugged in, phone or device is plugged in and charging and on Wi-Fi. And so I think a lot of that could be impacting people often plug in their phone at night, be on Wi-Fi. So a lot of this activity we're seeing more overnight. So there seems to be a higher open rate happening in the evening hours or in like the middle of the night kind of thing. So I think that's where we're seeing a lot of these false opens. I also don't know, we can't really tell right now whether Apple is going to download and cache all of your content right away, or if it's only basically things that are coming in before you've already downloaded on your phone. So if you were like refreshing your mail app, say at dinner, then would those emails may or may not be impacted by this Apple update because they wouldn't be cached until later and they're already in your phone and updated. So we're not quite seeing the huge hit that we were sort of expecting, but a couple different things. One, we haven't reached peak adoption for iOS 15 yet. So more of that is gonna come, and regardless, it is still gonna make it a little bit murky when we are talking about open rates overall. It just might not be the like doubled, open rates that people were sort of suspecting could happen here. So we are still thinking that this is going to be an issue. It's going to make open rates less reliable, but it's not going to be quite as big of a deal as we thought previously. But I'm curious from the group here, if you guys also have been noticing anything in your open rates or any other activity related to Apple's updates recently. You can go ahead and throw it in the chat at some point if you do have any other information, if you're seeing anything here or not, or if you have any questions about what we're seeing as it relates to open rates or anything for the Apple updates here.
Or when I know I drive you crazy every week when we talk about this, and I'm always like, but what are we seeing? And so I will just note for the group on the Americare side, I'm just always urging us not to get complacent because we're not seeing this impact, right? So I would just urge practitioners not to get complacent and not to really feel kind of impervious to this. I think, these changes are really going to have real consequences for deliverability. And I think especially as privacy practices keep changing. So I would just say, try and stay one step ahead of the curve and really think about being proactive in your email list engagement and how you can really implement those best practices and work with your partners and your list brokers on how to stay ahead of the curve, because I think it's just going to serve you best and your organization best if you can continue to implement those best practices and make sure that your list hygiene and your engagement rates are as high as possible when those adoption rates do eventually, when Apple forces you to take that iOS 15 update.
Yeah, and Trista, that's a perfect segue into what we would like to talk about next, knowing that these changes have already happened and we're still kind of figuring out the aftermath of what this is going to look like in the coming months. So as we all look to evolve email precision to pinpoint our most valuable audiences, we at MissionWired have a new product called Curate. So again, as Orwin and Trista were just discussing, given that we know forced updates are coming soon, adoption rates have been slower, but we're expecting them to pick up. We are assuming that open metrics are going to become unreliable over time. So how do we get ahead of that? How are we going to be proactive? As Trista was just saying, we should all plan to be with our digital programs. So again, Curate allows you to do that and be proactive rather than reactive. So Curate essentially gives organizations the ability to gain insights on the largest pool of active users that they should be mailing based on recent activity outside of their own email data. So by utilizing Curate, organizations can build enhanced segments with more precise lists of active email users to send those appeals to. And overall, the results are really speaking for themselves. It's allowing our partners to be more proactive rather than reactive, utilizing data of our other co-op members. And so, yeah, if you have any questions, definitely let us know or feel free to put them in the chat. But again, really love that Trista kind of leaned us in there just right off the bat, trying to be proactive here rather than reactive.
I would say Curate's been super helpful for Americares. We've been able to really lean in and grow our email list size quite significantly ahead of year end and Giving Tuesday. I mentioned previously in the call that we had been up against some pretty drastic email deliverability issues in previous years. And we had lost 3/4 of our list at some point, and we were really, really struggling to get that list back. And I think, having the insight and the access to this has really enabled us and really empowered us to make some decisions that have really encouraged us to get this list back. And so, I would say definitely have the conversations about pulling these levers and getting these lists back, because it can really be helpful. I think, especially as you're thinking about what the privacy protections are going to do to your list size and how you're going to explain to your chief development officer and your CEO 2 months down the road, 3 months down the road, how come your list size went from 150,000 to 75,000, and how come come your click rates are so low, and what's going on with the open rates? I think, being able to kind of explain that and think about what does that mean for your email revenue? What does that mean for your direct response revenue? How are we going to, come around all of that? I think for Americares, it's been a really great tool and a really great asset for our direct response program in particular.
I love that. Thank you, Trista. Yeah, I think it's been such an important part of the program so far, and we're really just scratching the surface of the use for Curate. It's been, I don't know how old the product is. It came about as a result of the Apple updates, and as soon as we sort of started to suspect that was going to be a thing, so it is still pretty new-ish, and we're already seeing really great results. And yeah, if you have any questions about Curate, feel free to reach out to any of us or throw a question in the chat or anything like that. But for the interest of time, we can go ahead and hop to our next section, which is a bit about SMS. One of the other big trends that we've been seeing for organizations over the past couple of years is the increasing use of SMS as a complement in many ways to the role that email tends to play in a digital program. So on the next slide here, we have an example from one of our clients of SMS subscriber growth over time. And we pretty much started at zero or pretty close to zero with this organization about partway through 2020 and have grown pretty tremendously since then. Hundreds of thousands of SMS subscribers in a pretty short amount of time. Some of the biggest jumps in growth that we saw were actually during the end of year giving period, Q4 for the calendar year. And a lot of that actually just came from relatively small tweaks and changes that we were doing to our existing email acquisition or lead generation programs. And that it really includes throwing an SMS capture on pretty much everything that you have, and also trying to get some of those email specific constituents that you might be messaging an opportunity to join your SMS file. We also have pretty robust content strategy for SMS, including the way that you welcome people and having a nice steady cadence of SMS throughout the year, throughout each month rather. And that's been really, really helpful. On the next slide, you can see just what this sort of turns to, which is a pretty nice growth in cumulative revenue for this organization. Yeah, we're starting at basically almost no revenue on SMS in the middle of 2020 to a few $100,000 coming just from SMS. So pretty tremendous growth in a relatively short amount of time, and with pretty few SMS to start. And I think our big takeaway here, as we see it from on the SMS front, is that it's never really too late to start. Even if you don't have all of the right infrastructure in place right away. It is one of those things that we see really, really high engagement rates, obviously massive open rates for SMS. Nobody likes seeing that little notification on your phone when you have a text message. So people tend to open and engage with those quite a lot. And it is just a nice other touch point that we can be ensured that we are interacting with people and creating that surround sound that we see as super effective across digital. So yeah, we see many more nonprofits doing this. We have some experience helping out on this front, and it really doesn't take nearly as much, I think, as most organizations tend to think. I think sometimes it can seem a little bit scary because you have to pick a provider and do a couple other things, but it's not quite as intense as you might think. MissionWired folks, anything else that you guys want to add on SMS before we try to move along here for the sake of time?
Just that we have expertise in both broadcast and peer-to-peer. So if you have any questions for your folks.
Amazing. And speaking of SMS as an additional channel that we're seeing a lot of people engage with, acquisition, donor acquisition, lead generation, all different types of acquisition, and the diversification of channels. I think, Andrea, are you going to walk us through this?
Yeah, happy to kickstart this party. So we know that when we're talking about acquisition diversification, as Oren was just chatting through SMS, that's one of the many channels that are present for you. We know that many of you are likely already engaging with what we consider primary channels, given that they are tried and true tested and methods of engaging potential donors, existing donors, prospects. So that's email, search advertising, and Facebook ads. When we think about secondary channels for you to explore, we often recognize that they might require a bit more of an upfront cost. They might be a bit less tried, true, and tested, but they're what we consider emerging channels and still very much worth exploration. So again, as Orrin was just alluding to, that's broadcast SMS, peer-to-peer. We work with a number of clients on YouTube advertising. And as I mentioned at the top of the call, advantage AI acquisition and reactivation. And then there's our tertiary channels for exploration, native advertising, display, peer-to-peer, SMS, which again, often require a bit more of an upfront cost, more expertise, more time, more planning. But overall, we definitely recommend a healthy mix of media when you're considering what channels to explore, and definitely want to pause and ask if Trista or Orrin want to pepper anything else in, given the number of channels we're about to dive into.
Yeah, I think one of the most common questions that we get from organizations that over the past couple of years, past 5 years, have been really, really focused on email, search, and Facebook. I don't know if anyone has noticed any, I don't know, conversations that Facebook might be having with the media these days. But it seems like we were in a precarious position with Facebook years ago, and now I'm not sure it's getting a ton, but no Facebook reps are on here, right? Everyone just is a little bit nervous about Facebook right now and about the future of Facebook. And if all of your acquisition efforts, donor acquisition, lead generation, if all of that is currently banked in Facebook, we're a little bit nervous about that. And so people are asking, what can we do beyond Facebook? What can we do beyond search? How can we diversify our portfolio of paid media in order to be a little bit more resilient to changes that are coming in privacy policies or just tech in general? And so that's sort of where we're going with a lot of this and trying to answer those questions. It's not a super easy answer right now, and Facebook is still pretty good. If you can spend at scale, you can still get a lot of acquisition on that front. But increasingly, what we are seeing people turn to in this secondary channel tends to be some YouTube advertising, although that takes a pretty heavy investment to see a lot of the same type of returns at scale that you might in Facebook. And increasingly, our members that engage across all of these channels and are in our Advantage AI co-op have started shifting a lot of their budgets away from some of those other channels and more into that co-op, because it is so competitive and in many ways more successful more quickly than some of these other channels. So I think that's the only context that I would offer, Andrea. If you want to keep us moving along, I know we only have 8 minutes left.
Yeah, definitely trying to be aware of time. So happy to jump into the next section. Oh, sorry, were you? Oh, amazing. We're going to jump ahead to converting sustainers, but definitely am happy to answer any questions, follow up with anyone who's just thinking about their channel diversification for end of year and heading into 2022.
Great. I think in addition to how do we diversify our acquisition sources and our paid media programs, one of the other questions that people have been coming to us for quite a long time, but especially over the past couple of years, is how to grow sustainers, how to grow their sustainer file. What can we do to get more sustainers? Everyone wants them. They're more reliable. You can do better financial planning when you have a ton of sustainers. We don't have all of the right answers for this. It's a little bit beyond the scope of just what we tend to do on digital, but I would say there are 3 pieces of advice that we typically give most people coming to us for sustainer acquisition. 1, if you really want to maximize your sustainer file, you're going to need maximal channels to do that. The organizations that have the most success and that have the largest sustainer files are all in on sustainer across all of their channels. They're on radio, they are sustainer first on digital, they have street canvassing, they have all of their channels operating at high capacity, geared towards converting sustainers. A lot of folks come to us and they don't have any of that, and they say, hey, can we do this on digital, and can we try to get a bunch of sustainers? And we say, sure, we can help with that. But if you're looking to be like the massive big fish sustainer programs like NPR or Planned Parenthood or Doctors Without Borders, or all of those really big programs, you're going to need all of your channels firing on all cylinders in order to make that work. So barring that, there are some things that we can do just on digital. And one, I think you just got to lean into your best practices. The same type of best practices that work for your one-time cash donors typically can work for your sustainer conversion as well. You just have to reframe the ask a little bit. And there's some recent changes over the past year or so about the way that you have to ask people in email to avoid some issues that the politicals have caused for us. But basically this means like use your big matches. I'm sure you all have seen like the 12x matches. Actually, I think we might have some on the next slide that have, will match your first year of a sustaining program. Like that kind of conversion. We see merch opportunities and premiums, as Trista flagged for us earlier with that Partners in Health example. All of those types of things that typically work pretty well for donor acquisition, we also see work really well for sustainer acquisition. You just might have to ratchet up the urgency a little. Maybe instead of just matching the first gift, you match a whole year if you can swing it. Maybe instead of a tote bag, you get something a bit higher quality, a sweater. I'm not sure. There's other things that you might do to sort of ratchet up the incentive there. And then finally, what a lot of our nonprofit partners have seen a lot of success with, instead of going the monthly recurring route, they've started to opt into quarterly or annual recurring asks as well, to really sort of get people who might not be committed to giving every month, but that can give on a quarterly basis or on an annual basis. And while I think we would all prefer having a monthly donor, 12 months of revenue and sort of be able to count on that throughout the course of the year, I haven't known any nonprofit to turn away a quarterly gift or an annual gift if your technology allows for that. So there's a few examples that we have on the next slide here, just of different ways that we've seen organizations do these types of things. There's entire sustainer appeals on the right-hand side that UNICEF is doing. Mercy Corps has that 12x match doing the entire first year. And we also see a lot of Facebook acquisition type of things for Doctors Without Borders and other organizations. These all happen to be international humanitarian organizations, but we see this across the board from the ASPCA to Planned Parenthood and the ACLU. These types of things typically work and leverage. There's that animated GIF that you see in the Mercy Corps example, like we talked about previously. One of the other things that like a lot of our clients have actually seen most of their growth for the sustainer files come from is an upsell, usually on a donor survey or a quiz or some other engagement opportunity, where we ask people to, engage with us, answer a quiz, answer some survey questions. They get primed to give, and then we ask them to support us with a monthly gift. And this has been particularly effective for organizations like Sandy Hook Promise. I think they have a pretty large sustainer file. I think either Evan or Sarah or somebody might have that number handy, but it's a lot of revenue and thank you. It's a lot of revenue that they've driven, and most of that has come from this type of survey experience. And when they don't say yes to a monthly gift, we ask them for that annual gift, and that has secured almost $1 million, I think, or something in the order of something like that for them that they can count on every end of year, which sort of takes some of the guesswork out of your end of year planning and goals. Alrighty, I know we're running really, really low on time, so we're just going to blaze through some of these additional analytics. If you have any questions about sustainers, please feel free to reach out, drop anything in the chat there. Just as a little fun goodbye, we wanted to offer a little bit of the data that we had to you all. So we took a look at last year's nonprofit results from across our clients, and that the data that we have, this is a survey or data analysis of 337,000 nonprofit donors that gave in end of year last year, end of year roughly meaning from about Giving Tuesday to December 31st. And what we saw here is that, like most of you expect, most of our end of year donors give only once, but nearly 15% of nonprofit donors give more than once. So it's something to just keep in mind. There are different motivations for different times of the year, and this is the thing that we always harp on with our nonprofit clients. On the next slide, we have this broken out by time frame, a little bit arbitrary, but we tend to think of our tentpole moments during end of year to be Giving Week, or the week or so around Thanksgiving, and the final stretch. Those are the two biggest moments for nonprofits when it comes to fundraising at end of year. And there's no doubt that it raises a ton of money. But the thing that we want to call out here is that chunk in the middle, the mid-December or most of December, really, we actually found that there were more unique donors in that time frame than than at the other two tentpoles. Now, anyone who knows a little bit about data analytics or is paying attention, like this is a little bit misleading. And yes, I'm intentionally being just a little bit misleading here. These timeframes are not the same. So we're looking at like 3 weeks of data for that mid-December versus the final stretch and giving week, which is far fewer. So if you were to look at, say, the next slide and wanted to see what the average daily donors, this is probably the trend that you would really expect. End of year having the most donors on average per day, giving week is second, followed by mid-December. But the point that we just want to stress here is we spend so much time focusing on just how important that end of year, the final stretch, those final few days of the year are, and they are super important. And same thing for Giving Tuesday / now Giving Week. It's a week of fundraising. It's also super important, but I don't want anyone to forget about the kinds of activity that we see and just the volume of donations that tend to come in the rest of December. And so make sure that you have opportunities to give in the middle of December. These motivations are all a little bit different. We typically see that Giving Week has more of like a social pressure vibe for giving. End of year has more tax deductibility vibe for giving, and mid-December might be carried more by the season of giving or holidays or things like that. So 3 different motivations, make sure that you have content and things for all of them. We are exactly on time, and I told you I would get to rambling a little bit, but if you have any questions or anything at all that you want to flag for us, I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes and answer any questions. And I think you guys have our email, hopefully on the invite that was sent to you or on this slide right here, nonprofit@missionwired.com. Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation. If you have any questions, we're happy to field them.